I look at this Oregon State team through 2 games. I see a lot of the same things as Boise State.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate GM. Their new game, Ultimate College Football HC, brand new mobile game, completely free, has no ads, 100% playable offline. Check it out. Begin your coaching legacy today. Everything you need to know about Oregon State right here on this very show. So we bring on Carter Bahns, 24/7 Sports, and BeaverBlitz.com. Be nice, everybody. Be nice. Hopefully Oregon is not nice, but in the football sense, not the off the field sense to Oregon State. I think the Beavs have taken enough of that at this point in time, so we need not get into that. But here's why I compare the Beavs to Boise State here, Carter. If Oregon plays the way they're capable of, they'll win the game by 20 to 30 points. If they don't, they will be in a dogfight. You have a team on the other side that wants to run the football and has a phenomenal running back. They are running a pro-style offense. They have a good offensive line. And they have a quarterback who's capable but doesn't scare me, especially with the way Oregon's secondary played last week. And I think Maddox Madsen is a little bit better than Giovanni McCoy. That's my comparison. Is that completely off kilter?
No, sounds about right to me. I mean, Oregon State's kind of the same team it's been for, the same team that it was really throughout the Jonathan Smith era, just probably with a little bit less talent. So, it's a recipe that has beaten Oregon in the past and can certainly beat them again if it works to its fullest potential. But it's a recipe that's certainly not without its flaws too, against a team that has more talent across the board in the Ducks, of course.
Yeah, and I think you look at the Boise State game last week, and Oregon has a lot higher ranked recruiting classes and higher ranked recruits and more high profile transfers and a better quarterback. And Oregon still has to shore up the issues that have plagued them over the last couple of weeks. Or I think Oregon State can push them here, because when I watch the first 2 games that the Beavs have played, I haven't been overly impressed, but I haven't been completely underwhelmed. And I see the formula. I go back to that 2022 game, and Oregon should have won that football game on paper. Oregon should have won that football game on the field. They didn't because they couldn't stop the run. You're going to get a heavy dose of that from Oregon State. And they're running a lot of the same running concepts that Boise State ran with a lot of success, like spotty success last week. But that spotty success was really, really good, where Ashton Jeanty was breaking a bunch of big runs. And that's where the Oregon State offense is going to start.
And not only is it a similar scheme, but Oregon State is so committed to the run that through 2 weeks, the Beavers lead the nation in time of possession. And what better recipe to upset a team that, again, has a talent edge than to control the time of possession, limit possessions, keep it low scoring, limit the opportunities for Oregon to pull away, and then might as well score a few points along the way as well. So it's a recipe that worked for Oregon State against inferior competition. Now we'll find out if it can work against a team that, again, on paper is better. And like I said before, I mean, it's worked in the past. Why can't it work this time? We'll see. I mean, again, Oregon's got defensive talent and can stop this rushing attack. It's going to come down to, frankly, how bad do the Ducks want it? Do the Ducks want it more than the 2022 team did when they were up by 3 scores? We'll find out. I think Oregon State's going to come into this game with way more motivation than it probably even needs, which is worth a lot in rivalry games. And I think that's why we see this game and this series end up a lot closer on the scoreboard than some people might think.
Yeah, the home team has won 5 consecutive Civil War football games, going back to 2019. 2018 was the last time the road team won. That was Oregon in Corvallis. But I think for the Ducks in this game, Carter, Jam Griffin is the guy that leads the backfield for Oregon State, who was with the Beavs, who left the Beavs. He has returned to the Beavs. And through the first couple of weeks, Oregon State 2-0 on the year, wins against Idaho State and San Diego State. Similar caliber opponents than what Oregon has played. I think the 2 teams the Ducks have played have been a step above both. But, so far, I think Oregon State's been a lot closer to their expectations than Oregon has. but Jam Griffin is the engine that makes the offense go.
Yeah, and I'd argue that Oregon State might have even exceeded expectations last week against San Diego State. I mean, that's
They pitched a shutout. They pitched a shutout.
Yeah, it's an Aztecs team that I don't frankly think is any good. But Oregon State hadn't shut out an opponent on the road in 41 years. Like, you don't do that by accident. So clearly the Beavers are doing something right defensively, and I think they will, with Trent Bray as head coach and Keith Hayward Johnson as the defensive coordinator. Though, I mean, those are two elite defensive minds who get the most out of their players and have gotten the most out of their players at every stop, including Trent Bray as DC at Oregon State. But to your point about Jam Griffin, I mean, the offense runs through him and his fellow running back, Anthony Hankerson, the transfer from Colorado, who I think was a little unheralded on that Colorado roster, and is kind of
they didn't run the football.
Right. And when they did give it to him, he was effective. He just didn't get enough snaps to really make an impact on that team and frankly to really matter. But Oregon State gives him opportunities, and he's a great change of pace back for the Beavers, who can kind of power it in those short yardage situations. They've got Jake Reichel, of course, a local product there, who's kind of that Jack Coletto, like Mauler type, who gets you the short yardage. So it's not just Jam Griffin in the backfield. Like, that's the beauty of the Oregon State backfield over the last 20 years, is there's never just one guy. There's always a second guy who's just as capable of breaking a defense. But Griffin is, I think, by far the best option they have, and they're going to ride him until it doesn't work.
Yeah, and you talked about the motivation level. I want to go back to that for a moment. Certainly Oregon knows that they've got to prove to the country they're worthy of all the hype they got in the preseason, and it's a rivalry game, and certainly that's another level of motivation. Marcus Harper tweeted out about that earlier this week, but certainly I think it's reasonable to expect that Oregon State's going to come out, and the crowd is going to come out with their hair on fire. I think the Beavs are down to standing room only at Reser Stadium, not just because Oregon is coming to town and of what happened a couple of years ago, but because of the de facto relegation in realignment that took place this offseason, and the role, however big or small it was for Oregon, there are going to be plenty of Beaver fans that are going to have an extra amount of juice flowing through their system because, hey, we're getting screwed here, something that I agree with, by the way, and Oregon is one of the teams responsible for it, and I think that's going to fire them up big time.
And the environment was hostile 2 years ago. It was hostile in 2016 when Oregon State beat that Justin Herbert freshman squad. And then, of course, in 2020, there was nobody there. But again, Reser is a place that Oregon has had a lot of trouble in recent years. And each of those losses for the Ducks have come in years where I think you would say that Oregon's probably the better team. Even that 2016 squad, like, there was a lot of talent on that team. It just had an inexperienced quarterback who's going up against a team that, again,
well, you also had a defensive staff you had a defensive staff in 2016 that was over its skis. They were historic. That's the worst Oregon defense this century, and they haven't always been known for having great defenses. But that 2016 team was the worst Oregon defense I've ever seen.
That's also true. To your point about the crowd, though, like, I expect this to be one of the all-time great atmospheres for an Oregon State football game, as long as the game is close. And it certainly will be at kickoff. I mean, this is the biggest game, I think, for different reasons than Oregon State's games were big last year. Obviously, they were big last year because the Beavers were a top 25 team, top 15 team, and they were hosting these, other ranked opponents. I think this is one of the biggest games in Oregon State football history because it's its first chance to go out and prove that it belongs at the power level in a post-Pac-12 world. And I don't think there's a better way to make that point to the college football world than on national TV in a good time slot against a top 10 team that's reeling a little bit, but everyone still thinks is a Big Ten title contender. Like, this is, Oregon fans like to say, well, every time the Beavers play Oregon, it's their Super Bowl. Yeah, it is. And it probably should be this year because this is Oregon State's best shot to say, hey, we belong.
Yeah, I think the Apple Cup is going to have the same sorts of vibes up in Seattle at Lumen Field. It just has that extra level of juice. Now, that there isn't always juice. There, of course, is. But there are a lot of big matchups in this game on both sides of the football. Carter and I are going to get to those next. How does Oregon's offensive line match up? Well, that's an important question, so why don't we answer that next? Hey, Locked On Ducks fans, want to take a moment to give you a heads up on a brand new mobile game I think you're going to love, Ultimate College Football HC. In this amazing game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. Can you actually imagine being the head coach of the Ducks and taking that with you on the go in your pocket anywhere that you are? That's what Ultimate College Football HC allows you to do, and everything you do will shape the future and legacy of the program because you have play calling duties, you oversee training camps, you hire coaching staff, you recruit players, everything you do. And the best part, Ultimate College Football HC, it's completely free, has no ads, 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. And of course, we have a special offer for Locked On Ducks fans. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this perk as it will get your team off to a strong start. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. And once you do that, if you want to go to an event like an Oregon game, for instance, go check out Game Time. Game Time has got Game Time picks now, which makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. And yes, that includes Oregon football games. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, Oregon games. Most importantly, of course, you get a panoramic view of your seat before you arrive. You get their lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time just takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. So that's why you need to go download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. That's Locked On College, all one word, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. How does Oregon's offensive line match up against the Oregon State front? Well, that's a question mark on the Oregon side of things, Carter, because Oregon fans probably wouldn't be able to tell you, I wouldn't be able to tell you definitively what the starting offensive line is going to look like. Is Matthew Bedford going to play? If he doesn't play, do they go with the unit where Poncho's at center, Harper's at right guard, Strother at left guard? That unit seemed to have more success, particularly with the ground game in the second half against Boise State. There are a lot of questions there. How capable is this Oregon State front four of exploiting the Ducks' offensive line woes early in the season?
Pretty capable, I think. Like we saw last week.
That's a ringing endorsement.
Well, it's because we haven't seen the Beavers play an opponent with a pulse. And
Gotcha.
Last week's San Diego State team was rolling out a true freshman quarterback who had a bum knee. It's just not a good San Diego State team, and Oregon State shut it out, which is exactly what you should do against a team of that caliber. So, credit to the Beavers for getting that job done. This is a test, unlike one that Oregon State has had so far. So I can't give it a huge endorsement, but I do have some confidence because of the talent Oregon State has on that front seven, and particularly at middle linebacker. Melvin Jordan IV, Isaiah Chisholm it's another fantastic inside linebacker duo. Oregon State's had a bunch of them over the last handful of years, and it's got another one with these two guys who are both two of the highest rated commits to Jonathan Smith during his tenure. Trent Bray was the lead recruiter there because they're inside linebackers. That's his position, and they stuck around and they're playing for him, and they're playing really well for him. I think they're two guys with Oregon's struggles on the offensive line, I think so glaringly coming in the middle and at that center position. I think that's where Oregon State's strength being in the middle of the defense comes into play, because all you got to do is bring those two guys down, give you a little bit more push in the middle of that defensive front. And I think you can wreak some havoc up the middle, whether that's stopping the run game, whether that's getting a little bit of pressure on Gabriel up the middle as opposed to off the edges. I think that's a nice little area for Oregon State to flex its defensive muscles. And then the back end of the defense is no slouch either. I mean, it's a very deep secondary with a lot of experience. But I think I like the matchup more for the Beavers up front than I do in the back end, containing those elite Oregon receivers and all that speed that they've got outside.
Yeah, I love the Oregon receivers every single week because they legitimately go 3-4 guys deep of players who can lead the Ducks in receiving in any given week. Saw Trayshawn Holden break a 59-yard touchdown last week, and he came on strong at the end of last year. Tez Johnson had 3 catches for -1 yard last week against Boise State. Could be in for a big day, but he takes a step back and Evan Stewart takes a step forward, has his first 100-yard game as a Duck, catching a couple long passes down the field. But I think that offensive line, defensive line matchup ultimately defines this game, Carter, because if the offensive line takes a major step forward for the Ducks, they protect Dylan Gabriel consistently, and they're able to run the football, I don't see Oregon State's offense as being able to keep up with Oregon's, and that's the key for the Beavers defense. If you cause havoc up front, we've seen the last couple of weeks, you disrupt Oregon's offense, it is not operating at peak efficiency. But if they get even just a couple of steps closer, I do not have confidence in Oregon State's quarterback wide receiver combination to keep up with what the Ducks could do.
This Oregon State team and frankly the program over probably the last 5 or 6 years is at its best when it is keeping opponents in check on the defensive front, because Oregon State, like I said in the beginning of this, it's a team that wants to limit possessions, keep things close, control time of possession, and kind of wear you down as the game goes. And that works really well if you're in a close game or if you've got physical advantages at other positions that you can kind of exploit from time to time. But this matchup is so dependent on Oregon State not allowing Oregon to score a bunch of points, because the way that Oregon State operates offensively isn't geared towards scoring in, like in the snap of a finger. Like Oregon State needs 5 minutes to go grind it through the offensive line, find holes in the defense with the running game. It's not going to go over the top and beat you offensively. Now, the play action, Oregon State sets up the play action really well because you have to respect the running game, but that's not the bread and butter. Whereas like with Oregon, you can get those speedy guys out in space and break one free. That's just not the way Oregon State operates. So if Oregon puts up 35 points or more, I think it's probably out of reach.
I think that 30 is the magic number for Oregon. I think if you get there, I feel confident in Oregon's ability to keep the Beavers under 30 points. And I know that Ashton Genty and company ran wild last week. Jam Griffin's a great player. He's not Ashton Genty. He's really good, though. And Oregon fans should remember that from 2022. He was one of the backs going wild when the defense couldn't make an adjustment and couldn't stop the rushing attack. If Oregon State's going to win this game, Carter, it feels like it's a 21-17 sort of game, or 24-20, keep it in that range. If you start to get into a track meet, though, I do feel confident in Oregon, because if you're at that point where Oregon's scoring that often, probably means they've cleaned up the offensive line issues, or they're getting a consistent push, they're protecting Dylan Gabriel, and he's able to take some shots down the field. I want to flip over, though, because this Oregon defensive line, I've talked about it a lot all offseason coming into the year. They're living up to the hype for me. This looks like the best Oregon defensive front since 2014, when you had Eric Armstead, DeForest Buckner. Now, are there 2 top 10 NFL draft picks on this defensive line? No. But the overall depth of talent, and there are multiple NFL guys on this defensive front for Oregon, that is the strength of the defense. And I think they, along with the secondary, for the most part, have been the best parts of the Oregon defense through the first couple of games. They've been wreaking havoc. They're getting a push. They're rushing the passer. They're just not allowing a high completion percentage. You go look at the quarterback stats from Idaho and Boise State's guys in the first couple of weeks. I'm pretty sure they're both under 50%. I know Matson was last week. He was 18 of 40, and the secondary deserves a lot of credit for that as well. How do you feel about this Oregon State offensive line?
I don't think it's quite as strong as it was when Jim Mihalichuk was coaching that group. I mean, he's one of the great offensive line coaches in the country. But Oregon State still does have quite a few pieces from those groups. Josh Gray manning the left guard position. He was always at tackle the last couple of times these teams played. So Oregon's going to have to adjust to him being at left guard. And I think that can be something that Oregon State uses, where if you just run Griffin behind Gray, your strongest asset, run to that left side against a team that's not used to him being there. Like maybe that works a little bit until the team adjusts. I would imagine Oregon's going to have a good plan for that, though. They're going to have their gap fits set in stone, but
they have to be sharper than they were last week, because when Genty broke the 70-yard touchdown, I don't even know if he was touched, and that should not ever happen. It wasn't anything special. It was just, here's inside zone, and he had a couple of bad run fits, and he broke a long one.
Yeah. Oregon State hasn't broken the long runs this year that it did with like a Damian Martinez, Jamar Jefferson. So that's something that I think we're still waiting to see if that's going to be part of their game. A lot of that does come back to the offensive line, because when Oregon State was breaking those long runs, and they broke quite a few of them in the 22 game, it was because there was just there was no defenders at the line of scrimmage. So it's an area to watch for sure. Is this Oregon State offensive line at the level where it was in the past, where it can just move guys like Mateo Uyunglele out of there and Jordan Burch out of there?
Yeah, and I think DJ Harmon goes in that conversation. Pro Football Focus has got him rated as, I think, one of the 10 best interior guys through the first 2 weeks of the college football season. And that matches what we have seen. He's been disruptive, he's been active, and exactly what we were excited about when he transferred to the Ducks from Michigan State. There's still one more matchup that I'm going to ask Carter about. Then we'll get to some individual players, and then Carter has got a prediction. I don't yet. I get to save that for Friday, but Carter has to do it here as we record on Tuesday night. That's coming up next. Before we wrap up, let's talk about FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel here at the network. Why? Because they're America's #1 sports book. Well, guess what? We have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5, as many fingers as I've got on my right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, $5, and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That's a real deal. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Plus, if you want to bet Oregon games, you can. If you want to bet other college football games, you can. If you want to bet Major League Baseball, you can. Everything that you want is over at FanDuel, which is why you should go check them out and why they're America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com, download America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel.com, that's the place to go. FanDuel, official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. All right, continuing on here with Carter Bahns, BeaverBlitz.com, and 24/7 Sports. Last position group before we get to a couple of names to know on the Beavs, including their quarterback. This Oregon wide receiver room is really good. Evan Stewart, Trayshawn Holden, Tez Johnson. Any one of those guys, you throw Terrence Ferguson into the mix, you probably have 4 NFL caliber players there in this receiving core. I think Trayshawn Holden can be a Juwan Johnson type where he makes the switch to tight end in the NFL. He could stay a receiver too. But I think all 4 of those guys are playing on Sundays after this season. And when you look at this Oregon State secondary, who are the guys that you think match up best with each of those receiving threats for the Ducks?
Jaden Robinson is number 1 there. He's a guy who shined in practice when I was still primarily covering Oregon State like 4 years ago, and was someone who I was super high on as a breakout candidate, like very early on in the Jonathan Smith era. He dealt with some injuries. Oregon State added, the Wright brothers to that group, and he just never quite broke through. He's the guy now. Like, he is the number 1 cornerback in that room, and he looks like the same guy that I saw on that practice field a handful of years ago that was breaking through. I think he is truly one of the stars on this team. How he matches up against a top flight receiver, we haven't seen that yet throughout his career. So I am curious to see, is he able to match the speed of some of those guys, and can he stay locked into them when they're running those go routes? The other guy to watch for, Kobe Singleton, didn't get a ton of run in the first game. He was listed at number 2 on the depth chart. Everyone thought that he could kind of be that guy, that Jaden Robinson type guy, defending in the backfield there after he came from Liberty, where he had a handful of interceptions last year. He was
Kobe Singleton, Southern Utah legend. He was at Southern Utah before he went to
Liberty.
Liberty.
He started at Southern Utah, is that right?
Yeah, he was Southern Utah, and then he went to Liberty, and now he's at Oregon State. And I remember watching him at practice or in games when he was at SUU, and particularly during games, and you knew he probably wasn't going to be in the FCS for very long. Real solid football player.
Yeah, special talent at the group of 5 level, and I think fits in this defensive backfield perfectly. He's got immense upside as the season goes along. Sometimes you see, though, at the cornerback position, like if you're moving up a level, sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get acclimated. I think we see him come along as the season goes on. It'd be awesome to see for Oregon State if this is kind of his breakout game with the Beavs. But Those are the two corners that I like the most. The safety room is very deep, very experienced. Jack Conne. If you remember Katano Ladapo, who started as a walk-on, he was there for like 6 or 7 years, and now he's in the NFL. Jack Conne is from the exact same mold. Another guy who, like, his freshman year as a walk-on in practice was running with the 1s and 2s in practice, and now here he is as kind of the star of that safety room. So, again, Oregon State's got guys in that room that have been in a Trent Bray defense for years on years and are very, very experienced and know what they're doing back there and have a bit of talent as well. So it's not like anything's going to be given to the Oregon receivers. But I do think that, I mean, frankly, they just overmatch just about any secondary that they're going to go up against this season.
When you look at the passing game for Oregon State, it is secondary to the ground game, as we talked about, but Giovanni McCoy emerged from a 3-way quarterback battle in fall camp. He's the starter. Through 2 games, his leading receiver has totaled 124 yards. I forget the name of the guy. I'm sure you know off the top of your head. Trent Walker. That's their leading receiver so far. Talk about Walker at the receiver position real quick, but most importantly, what Oregon fans probably want to hear is, what does Giovanni McCoy bring to the quarterback table?
Yeah, not a super dynamic athlete, Trent Walker, but really reliable with the ball. There's a reason he's been the number 1 target on this offense. He's very much earned it. Now, I think when Darius Clemens gets healthy, he's a Michigan transfer who played a little bit on last year's championship team. He's from Oregon, a local kid, back in the Beaver State now at Oregon State. When he's healthy,
The what state?
I mean, it is the Beaver State. That is the motto. But
I'm just gonna bring you back to a moment where I told Oregon fans to be nice to early in the show. And,
all right.
My words carry a lot of weight. My words carry a lot of weight. You might want to tone it down.
I am stating Oregon facts right here. This is there's your Oregon State history. But no, when Darius Clemens is healthy, and it could be as soon as this week. I wouldn't be shocked if they hold him out a little bit longer. He'll be the guy, and I think far and away, he's got the potential to be the number 1 receiver by a pretty significant margin if he is what we think he can be. That will be huge for a passing game that really hasn't done a whole lot. I mean, it was somewhat active against San Diego State, but it was mostly just McCoy finding Walker for 10 to 15 yards. Move the chains. All right, let's run it a little bit more. And then Oregon State had the flea flicker to Trent Walker, wide open, should have been about a 50-ish yard touchdown, and ball goes right through his hands. He's wide open and misses the touchdown opportunity there. So, look, I mean, Giovanni McCoy, I think, is a very capable passer. He's more dynamic with his legs than anything Oregon State has had. He made a lot of throws on the run last week, which are really promising to me. Not an element of Oregon State's offense that has been there really probably ever. Like, Oregon State's very traditionally a pocket passer type team. They've got someone who can run out of the pocket and make a throw across his body as he's running to the sideline now. Like, it's pretty exciting to see that. I just don't know that he has the weapons in the receiving core to like fully take advantage of that yet. But if Clemens is a full go, like, I'd be pretty excited to see what McCoy does with a full receiving core, because I think he's got the talent, but he hasn't necessarily showed it to like a super reliable level yet.
As was the case with Maddox Madsen last week, if Oregon holds him around 50% completion and under 200 yards, I think that's a good performance from the defense and what you should expect. And rushing-wise, I think you have to hold the Beavs well under 200 yards to be sure. And if you hold them around 150, 160, make McCoy beat you with his arm, I think that's where Oregon can thrive the most. But I'm not making my prediction yet. I'm saving that for Friday because that's how we roll here at Locked On Ducks. But Carter's got one. So, Carter, Beaver guy, what's your prediction for the game?
Yeah, to your point, I think if Oregon State runs for 250-ish yards, the Beavers probably win this game because Oregon probably doesn't have enough possessions to fully pull away. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Ducks just have too much talent on the defensive front to get eaten alive by the offensive line and the running backs like it has in the last couple of matchups at Reser. So I like the Ducks to get this done. I think, again, like the last 2 games, it could be a lot closer than the line may suggest and closer than Oregon fans would like to see. But Man, give me the Ducks like 31-21. I think the Beavers are going to score some points regardless. I just don't think that they can move the ball as much as they did in those last couple of wins.
Carter Bahns, BeaverBlitz.com, 24/7 Sports. Carter, we appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.